I welcome our panelists. The topic of the second session will be finances. We touched upon it already a little bit. So what instruments do we need and do we call for to fund a just transition? I welcome Peter Singer, chair of the group Die Linke in the Regional Council in Cologne. I welcome Alexandra Tomczak, expert in the European Commission DG Energy on EU coal. We are really happy that Frédéric Moch is here, the head of Department for Industrial, Structural and Service Policy. And I welcome Piotr Janiszewski from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Warsaw in Poland. So I give the floor to Peter.
Good morning, everybody. Please excuse me if I have trouble with my voice. I have a bad cold. I am the chair of the Linke parliamentary group in Cologne. I come from the Rhine, between Cologne and Aachen. Our region faces structural change, and in the bodies that I'm involved in, I deal with authorizations for open cast mines and power stations, and obviously with the coming transition, which we want to be as just as possible. Before I get down to the subject, please allow me to say a few words about the current situation in the Rhine coal field. There are various conflicts going on. There is a very old forest in the area. RWE wants to extend its surface mine, lignite mine. There was a legal complaint that was rejected. The forest is at the moment occupied by environmentalists. Attempts are being made to bring that to an end. There were a lot of police out there last weekend, quite a lot of violence. The process which the BND is involved in, a legal procedure, had been in the courts for 5 years. They are claiming that the authorizations are void because the Habitat Directive is being ignored. Now, attempts were made to mediate not that long ago, but that failed. What was surprising for all concerned was that the Münster Court, which is the next highest legal authority, stopped the expansion plans. Protests is being criminalised by the local government, and yet it is not violent, and there is a lot of support for it. This conference should send out a signal of solidarity with the activists who are carrying out non-violent resistance. Now, to get down to the subject itself, I have 4 points that I'd like to address. The coal phase-out in North Rhine-Westphalia and in Germany and in Europe and throughout the world is unavoidable for environmental reasons. All scientific studies come to the same conclusions. The combustion of lignite is the main cause of CO2 emissions in Germany. The climate objectives of the federal government and the regional government in North Rhine-Westphalia can never be achieved if we go on mining lignite. There has to be a social and economic transition, but that transition is constantly pushed back. People's health will continue to be jeopardized, both locally and throughout the world. Secondly, I'm sorry, but I'm having trouble with my voice. Secondly, if we look at the debate on climate, on lignite and on structural change, it looks as if there are two parallel words here. The Germany Industrial Trade Union, responsible for mining and chemistry, seems to believe that since there is going to be a loss of jobs in the next decade, the remaining jobs must be defended at all costs. And then you have the environmental activists who often give the impression that it's almost the end of the world and that the world will end tomorrow unless we stop using lignite. We need to look at these different points of view, and we need to try to bring these parallel worlds together. We need to gain an understanding of these different viewpoints and then develop prospects for the future. Thirdly, we're talking about jobs, we're talking about climate protection and a lot of people's future. And all of these are part of a whole. Social matters and environmental matters cannot be separated from each other. And that is why we demand a coal phase-out which is based on the proper legal and social framework. By 2025, all the power plants which are more than 30 years old should be taken off the grid. We have a climate protection programme with a roadmap for the phase-out of lignite, just as we have a roadmap for the nuclear phase out. We don't want mini jobs, we want proper jobs. We don't want people to have to draw benefit in addition to their jobs. We don't want people to be poor in their old age. We think that there are enough opportunities out there to create proper jobs in regeneration, for example. So we left-wingers have to create industrial jobs for when mining is over, not another logistics hub or some kind of tourist facility on the old coal field. We're the largest coalfield in Europe. I can give you a few figures which come from the German Lignite Association. In 2016, 8,961 people were employed. That's direct employment. You have about the same number working in deliveries. And a year later, the figure was, a few years back, the figure was 15,500. This isn't only about renewables. There have also been a lot of cuts and rationalisation. To be fair, in the German lignite industry at least, many of these dismissals were done in a socially responsible way. The bulk of people still working in the coalfields in the Rhine at the moment are over 50. It ought to be possible for them to retire over time. And then there is the damage that's been done by the coal industry. The sites will have to be cleaned up, landscaped. That will provide jobs for decades. We don't know how many. If you travel through a lignite mine and look at the destruction there and the power plants and so on, it gives you an idea of the scale. We need to ensure that RWE copes with the lasting damage that it has done. That is not provided for in Germany at the moment. Reserves are being put aside by energy companies to cope with the damage done, but in my eyes this is just creative accounting. Profits are always privatised, losses are socialised or communitised. It's always the taxpayer who pays. The provision of funds to deal with the burden of the past should be part and parcel of a just transition. And independent experts have to determine how much money is involved. Companies cannot be allowed to hide the figures and use confidentiality. The most important instrument for a just transition is state aid, state support, quite simply money. I said this last year at this meeting. What's good about our situation is that we have a lot of knowledge and skill amongst the people who've worked in the coalfields and power plants, together with technical knowledge, academic knowledge, and we have university centres in Aachen and Jülich. We can develop new prospects for industry. I'm thinking about battery storage. I'm thinking about energy gained through regeneration. Structural change or a just transition isn't a catastrophe. It's an opportunity for the future, and slowly, unfortunately too slowly, we're seeing initiatives that are taking us in the right direction. There are municipalities in my area that are getting together to talk about the future after coal, developing new industrial estates, creating new jobs. From the point of view of the left, I feel that the problem is being underestimated. If we want new industry, we have to prepare the land, the terrain. A single municipality can't afford to do that. We need alliances. Even state bodies and institutions are slowly recognising the fact that logistics hubs and tourism are not going to bring about the desired structural change. One of the main players here is the Innovation Region Rhine GmbH, which is a group of municipalities, administrations and RWE. There is no democratic control. The body develops models, initiatives, ideas, and supports structural change through carrying out projects. They work with partners in the academic world, in industry, in politics, in the region and outside it. So far, there have only been ideas, projects and feasibility studies. The project is financed by the region of North Rhine-Westphalia and the European Regional Development Fund. I feel that too much emphasis is being laid here on these sources. We need to think about local involvement, the unions. I have to say that the ideas that have been put forward, although there's been a lack of transparency, are interesting ones. Another problem is the energy market. Tax revenues are dropping. The dividends paid out to the RWE are a problem. These budgetary problems can only be overcome if new companies, new industry can be created, and a start is being made. There is support from the state. We, the left, have suggested the creation of a structural change fund with 50 million euros a year. What is essential is that representatives of the local workforce should be part and parcel of the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Now I give the floor to Alexandra Tomczak of the European Commission.
Thank you. So my name is Alexandra Tomczak. I work for DG Energy in a unit dealing with retail markets, but also coal. And so I guess I was invited here because I am working on the establishment of a platform for coal regions in transition, which is going to be launched in December. So on December the 11th in Strasbourg, and this is a project that we have been working on in the Commission in DG Energy for about a year now. So we have started at the end of last year, where we have launched the clean energy package, in which in the communication we announced a number of accompanying measures to boost clean energy transition. And one of these measures that was announced in the communication was to support coal and carbon intensive regions in transition. And so the establishment of this platform in December, the launch of the platform on December the 11th is sort of the first concrete implementation of this commitment to assist coal and carbon intensive regions. So I thought that perhaps I will tell you a little bit how we see the platform going forward, what we have planned in terms of the functioning of the platform, and then also, since the theme of the panel is financing for coal regions and for the transition, then I will give you a general overview of the funds that we see playing the most important role in financing the transition, knowing that at the moment we have no new funds to administer for the just transition. And as you know, we are in discussions already on the next multi-annual financial framework, but of course these discussions are going on and at a higher political level, so it's beyond my own knowledge and competence to speak about the discussions about what's going to happen after 2020. But there are a lot of interesting funds that we are working with in the context of the platform. So I think saying a few words about that could already perhaps start an interesting discussion as part of this forum. So the platform on coal regions in transition. The main what are our objectives that we're planning to achieve with this platform? First of all, it will be the first forum established at the EU level in which we will bring stakeholders, including social partners, NGOs, public authorities, so regional and national public authorities, and industry, to discuss this question of transition in coal regions. We have identified that there are 12 member states today and around 41 regions which are actively mining coal in the EU. So our objective is to first start with the coal mining regions and then see how this work is, this format of work that we're proposing is working. Is it working or not? And then extend this to all carbon intensive regions. And of course, this is a little bit more complicated because defining carbon intensive regions is a little bit more complicated than simply defining coal mining regions. Why are we starting with coal mining regions? Well, it's because we see that, first of all, we have seen a number of announcements of phase-outs of coal use and coal production across the EU. We have seen France recently announcing that they want to phase out coal use by 2023, UK 2025. We know that similar discussions are going on in Italy, in Portugal, in the Netherlands, so it's definitely an issue that it's quite visibly on the agenda of a number of member states. And alongside this, we have also seen announcements of closures of coal mines, well, not only in Spain, but also in Poland, in Romania, in Czech Republic. So really we can see a substantial sort of acceleration in this trend of declining coal production and use in the EU, even though a number of member states still declare that they want to continue using coal in the future. And so we see 185,000 people being employed in coal mining today, direct jobs only. Around 240,000 were employed in 2012, so this number is going down quite rapidly. The employment is of course concentrated in nature, so you see regions such as Silesia in Poland having around 80,000 jobs in coal mining, which is a big proportion. A lot of communities also see coal mining companies as the largest employers still within their communities. So there seems to be a lot of reasons why the EU and the Commission should be taking very strong interest in this trend and try to mobilize to bring forward an initiative that could be helpful to the stakeholders, to the member states, to the regions, but also to all the other local stakeholders to not only learn from each other what can be done to organize this process in a socially fair way, but also to already identify projects and try to help them connect with the right EU funds and programs to kickstart this process of transition in the coal mining regions. So in order to do this, we will be proposing to work in two main areas, one on post-coal economy and structural transformation, so really looking into new areas of growth and job creation that the regions can move to, and that could be anything from e-mobility or farming, as is perhaps the case in Greece. In Western Macedonia, they are considering a lot of different pathways for exiting lignite mining and moving into other directions, but that could also mean remaining with the energy profile and accelerating the deployment of renewables and looking at the potential of advanced coal technologies. So we will have a lot of different scenarios and interests from coal regions. This we know already. That's why, well, this one working group and work stream will be focusing on structural transformation and post-coal, and the second one will be looking at things like eco-innovation and advanced coal technologies. Eco-innovation, what do we mean by that? Well, simply all the strategies and projects that can help these regions move into areas such as clean air strategies, because we have seen that a lot of these coal mining communities and the cities around which coal mining activities are happening today are also struggling with problems such as air quality. So these two work streams will be starting next year. So in December we are sort of making the political launch of the initiative, and then the real work will be starting in February. And if you visit the website of DG Energy, you will see that that if you're interested in joining one of the working groups, then this is an open process, and you can contact us to express your interest and tell us about projects or good practices that you have been working on or have in mind that you would like to present as part of one of these two working groups. And that brings me to the second part of my intervention. I wanted to say a little bit about the funds and programs that we have at the disposal of member states, regions, and other stakeholders to support this process of transition, because, as I said before, we don't have any new funds at the moment to support this initiative. So we are really looking at finding ways of using the existing funds and money in a more effective way. And there is a margin for improving the use of funds, because if you look at things like the European Social Fund, in a number of member states, not even a third of these funds have been committed to projects, let alone spent for any project. And of course, this multi-annual financial framework runs until 2020, so it's high time that we look at the remaining funds and try to accelerate, not only accelerate their spending, but also come up with meaningful projects that can actually make a difference on the ground. So of course, you know, the main funding tool that we have is the cohesion policy and all the funds that fall under the cohesion policy. And under this, you probably know that 24 billion euros was earmarked in the current budget for low carbon technologies. This, of course, these funds are administered by the managing authorities, which are usually the member states or the regions based on the configuration of each member state. But of course, the Commission is working together with the member states and the regions to come up with operational programs and has the capacity also to reprogram some of the spending if there is a good reason to do so, or if, for example, the issue of transition is not sufficiently taken into account in the programs that the member states and regions have come up with. The same principle applies to the European Social Fund, which you probably know is financing things like really financing the human capital of the EU. So long-term reskilling, training, entrepreneurship, business creation, and this fund can fund up to 70% of costs of a project. So it could be quite an interesting way of funding reskilling of workers who are affected by the transition, for example, in the coal mining regions. A more punctual and sort of rapid intervention possibility is presented by the 1 minute left European Globalization Adjustment Fund, and this fund has been used recently in Spain, for example, to support 339 workers which have been made redundant after a closure of a coal mine. So there's also a possibility to use this fund again for reskilling and support for workers, but with its own limitations because it can only be used once a coal mine has been closed. These are the sort of the main funds. Then with one big opportunity that I think is not sufficiently mentioned during these sort of discussions is the revenues from the ETS. I think you had a discussion about ETS in the previous panel. There are large sums that are being raised by member states as part of the auctioning of ETS allowances, and according to the EU rules, 50% should be spent on low carbon transition. Well, these funds could also be spent sort of, since they have been generated in the carbon intensive regions in the first place, a lot of it could be spent again in these regions to support long-term growth and support the creation of new jobs. Under the revised ETS directive, we will also have the modernization fund, which will also have a specific line on the transition issues. So really the number of funds that we can be talking about is immense, and the main challenges here is funding regional infrastructure, but also providing funding for the people, for the human capital people, for reskilling, for training, and here it's mainly the ESF and but also to a certain extent the ETS revenues. And the third one, which perhaps I don't really have time to cover now, but is funding technology development. So for technology development, we will also have under the revised ETS the innovation fund, which will finance the most innovative renewables and CCS and CCU technologies, but also existing funds such as Horizon 2020 or the Research Fund on Coal and Steel, which is still operating and can provide support in particular to the carbon intensive regions. So yeah, I'll leave it here. If there are questions later, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Frederik Moch, Deutscher Gewerkschaftsbund.
Thank you, and good afternoon from me, dear colleagues. For those of you who don't know the Deutscher Gewerkschaftsbund, or DGB, it's the German Trade Union Association, the largest umbrella organization for trade unions in Germany. We have 8 members, and our 8 members have more than about 6 million employees that they represent in various sectors of the German industry, so both in public and in private sectors, as well as industry. So we bring together all these different trade union players. Perhaps I can start with a few general comments. I think when talking about progressive energy and climate policy, you do have to take a step back and look at where the EU stands in 2017. Now, the EU was once founded as a community of values for democracy, rule of law, peace, economic prosperity. And I think in 2017 there's one comment you have to make, which is that this promise, this founding promise, is running into a bit of a wall at the moment. The reason I say that is that now, in 2017, we see that at least in the peripheral areas of Europe, social peace is under an incredible strain, as is prosperity. Looking at youth unemployment in countries such as Greece or Spain, we simply can't ignore this fracture that is emerging, and I think that's important to bear in mind when thinking about a just transition, because even within wealthy societies there are huge inequalities, which hasn't actually come up today yet, surprisingly, but it plays a massive role. Last week in the German press, that was one of the main stories. You know, Germany is a wealthy country within Europe, but 21% of children live in poverty in Germany. So here we are in 2017, at a time when the EU really is still undergoing a crisis. And this crisis is of a very fundamental nature. And of course that's not the topic of our discussion here today, but if you were to look at various policy areas at EU level, we'd end up seeing that we're really running into a wall. And the founding promise of prosperity and social justice, and as I said, from the point of view of my association, we really are at an impasse. And no 2 weeks ago, the social pillar, the European social pillar, was published, but we still seem to just be making great announcements, because if you look at politics on a daily basis, all you see is that neoliberal thinking is still the driving force in policy making. And I say this because when considering climate change, we're faced with a huge challenge, and you can't solve this challenge simply by relying on market forces. You need a strong state. You need a strong public force that is able to push the economy and society in certain directions, and that is willing to carry out ambitious investment projects. Now, in 2017, we see that at the European level we seem to be moving in a different direction, and as far as I'm concerned, all it is a programme to foster right-wing populism. If we look at recent elections, including the elections in Germany, we see that those regions that are most affected by transition, by change, the right-wing party Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, managed to gain 30% of votes. But that was also the case in regions that are doing fairly well with a strong automotive industry. Ingolstadt, for instance, such a an area, the AfD was the second strongest party, and from our point of view, we see the underlying reason for this as being uncertainty. And the diesel scandal, climate change, coal, all these issues are creating a lot of insecurity and uncertainty for people, and there doesn't seem to be a big idea as to which way we should be going. And just transition is precisely precisely about that. It's about coming up with a key idea and come up with a progressive agenda to move forward to address this insecurity, and at the same time ensure that the necessary reduction in CO2 levels that we so desperately need can be achieved. We have a very ambitious climate and energy agenda at the EU level. There always seem to be percentage goals on CO2, on energy efficiency, on renewable energies, which is fine and good, but what we're lacking is aims in terms of job creation. As my colleague from the United Kingdom mentioned earlier on, the new jobs that are being created in the green sector in Great Britain, there's a clear aim there. So why don't we have that at the EU level as well? If we look at the 2020 or 2030 aims within the EU, why shouldn't we also set a target for a certain number of new high-quality jobs? So we need these positive ideas, otherwise I don't think you even need to bother with all the details, because people get lost in the details, and that's one of the big problems. So for me, this is a decisive point. I think we need to look at this issue from a perspective that grants the state more room for manoeuvre to really carry out policy design. And when it comes to austerity, that really hasn't been the case. If we looked at the south of Europe, nothing that's been going on there is compatible with a just transition. So you need to really shift the understanding of where we want to go. We've just talked about the mid-term financial framework at EU level, which is important. Structural funds are, of course, also linked to that. Nowadays, in the days of Brexit, we want to spend more on military, and that means that there'll be less left over for everything that the structural funds want to achieve. Then we have the Juncker plan, the European Fund for Strategic Investment, and all this just means that there will be less money available at the end of the day for the structural funds. And, of course, hardly any money to address the issue of good jobs. In Germany, the implementation is done involving all social partners. We try to ensure that good working contracts and working conditions are created, and that is, of course, highly important. Now, this brings me to the core of my intervention, really, which is, what should such a just transition strategy look like? How can it be implemented? How can it be rendered more concrete? Now, just transition has nothing to do with charity. It has to do with a positive vision, with new jobs, decent jobs, wealth, prosperity, and economic progress. So we have to use the tools that we have. It's all about, and the instruments we have are social dialogue, collective agreements, collective bargaining, and the opportunity to generate well-paid, decent jobs. And we've seen that going downhill in the last few years, and we have to combat that, and we have to stand strong to ensure that workers have an opportunity to really play a role in this transition. This has to do with fair energy prices as well. When it comes to the issue of energy poverty, I always tread a little carefully, because energy poverty really isn't the right term. It's a much broader problem of poverty, and you have to address that as well. When people can't meet their basic needs, we're talking about poverty in general terms, not just energy poverty. And the question then is, how can we generate innovation and industrial progress and move it forward. Now, all the funds that have been mentioned that we should tackle in detail, in all of those funds, decent work according to collective agreements with involvement of the workers are things that have to be taken into account. Everywhere where new jobs are created, quite independently of whether or not that's in climate areas or other areas, those are usually jobs which do not abide by the high standards we currently have or that we used to have in wind energy, for instance. Fortunately, Germany is quite far advanced, but unfortunately, we're also at the top of the list when it comes to works councils being undermined and payment conditions being worsened. So more can be achieved with strong unions and strong involvement of workers. You end up with strong collective agreements, and that of course can only be a good thing. Now, the question that was posed to our panel is, what is the direction we should be going in? And I think public investments is a key term. Benjamin already mentioned the ETUC's plan. Earlier in Germany we had discussions around a European Marshall Plan, and it's crucial that we push public investment in Europe. We said that we need 260 billion per year, and 150 billion thereof would be necessary for a European energy transition, for renewable energies, infrastructure, energy storage, etc. And from what our economists are saying, 9 to 11 million new jobs could be created in the medium term, and at the end of the day a lot of our energy import could be reduced. So the topic of investing in the European energy transition is at the heart of the matter, and we need more investment, quite clearly. We're lagging behind in the European Union, and to believe that public-private partnerships will be able to fill that gap, the gap that the public funds cannot cover due to austerity, simply is the wrong conclusion. What we need instead is a different taxation policy, and we have to talk about this. The money's there, the money just isn't in the right place. So we need to fight to ensure that the state has enough room to act and has enough space and enough funds to support those industries that are moving towards decarbonisation and to perhaps foster innovation in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederick. And now I give the floor to Piotr Janiszoki.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. I work for the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation's Warsaw office, where one of our areas of our work is supporting dialogue, constructive dialogue with miners' unions and related unions of the energy branch, to face the challenges connected with economic transition and just transition, and in the context of the EU energy and climate policy. And this is quite a difficult challenge, I must say, but we are trying to develop it using experience from Germany, from other European countries, and even globally. That's why I would like to lay out, very generally, the Polish situation, the Polish debate about just transition, or the EU, or the policy towards reducing coal and the climate policy, because you probably know that when policy is being debated at the European level about decarbonization and climate policy, the Polish government is usually one of the strongest opponents to setting up very ambitious decarbonizing goals, so to say. So just to give you a very basic layout, I think it was already mentioned that Poland is a state whose energy mix is solely still based on coal and lignite. Over 80% of it is still coal and lignite. Last year, Poland extracted over 70 million tons of coal and 80 million tons of lignite, and the economy consumed over 77 million tons. So this makes us right after Germany, the biggest consumer of coal for industrial reasons. And also in the heating, in energy and heating, coal is still the strongest player. For example, 70% of singular family houses still use coal as a heating fuel. And of course, apart from the fact that this is the economy based on coal creates significant problems from the climate policy perspective, it is also the problem with emissions and pollution is highly felt in Polish cities. If we look at the 50 most polluted in terms of air cities in the European Union, 33 out of those 50 are Polish cities. So we can see the problem with the smog problem. If you look at the map of smog in Europe, especially nowadays since heating season has already started, you can see that Poland is really the reddest point on the whole European map. So these are significant problems. Nevertheless, Poland has this energy economy is still based on coal, and since the transition period of 1989-1990, nothing really has changed in this respect. Though it is often considered to be a big problem, and the need to restructuralize this section of the economy has always been discussed. There was never a long-term plan of what to do with this problem, and in which case we still have, as it was said, around 80,000 people work in the mining industry, in the mining industry, and around 9,000 people in the lignite industry. That is mostly predominantly located in the Silesia region. 80% of the industry is located there, and now the debate around the future of the Polish energy mix and coal and in energy industry has basically been polarized, like many other issues in Poland, into two big blocks. Against the current situation and for changing the energy mix to make the renewable energy resources, or in some cases atom energy, have a bigger part in the energy mix. We have not only environmental organizations, which are not particularly strong in Poland, though are active, but also a lot of the experts, think tanks, not only political but business think tanks, liberal media talk about the problem that coal is a burden, and very strong decisive action should be taken. I have an example here, the Polityka weekly newspaper, which is one of the main, let's say, liberal-orientated newspapers in Poland. This last week's issue has a title about coal, that is, coal is choking the Polish Republic. And the idea is that no decisions are being made because there's a big interest group of both the companies, but also the unions, the minor unions, that block every reform plan that has always been created, and this is the main reason why we're still solely dependent on coal. Of course, the arguments are that this is a very costly branch of industry, that Poland has to subsidize this. There are very different numbers depending on the time period, the methodology, and what is the aim of the institution. But we're talking about tens of billions of Polish zloty of subsidies in like 10 or 15 years, depending on what you're talking about, which institution you're talking about. The fact that the present mines are digging deeper and deeper, and it's becoming more and more expensive to extract coal from these mines because they are getting too deeper, and it's not only more costly, but also it's starting to become more dangerous. And the fact that public opinion favors kind of restructuring the Polish energy mix, that people are in favor of renewable energy as a source of heat and energy, and of course the fact the fact that we are not even at the moment able to secure enough coal for the industry, for the power plants as it is now. For example, last year, as I mentioned, over 7 million tons of coal was needed from import, because the Polish mines themselves could not supply enough of the fuel, and this makes the argument that coal is a national resource that supports our national sovereignty false. This falsifies this argument, and especially since this the coal was imported mostly from Russia, which is also a strong argument in Polish debate when energy sovereignty is concerned. Now, the current government's stand on this issue is strongly opposed to this. The plan for the plan that was strategic plan that was accepted by the government this year states that the reduction of coal in the Polish energy mix can only reach 60% by 2013, and with the perspective of 50% by 2050. So you can see this is very much in opposition to the aims and goals that we were talking about up until now. This is the official government policy, and the argument is that coal is, as I said, a national resource that will secure our energetic sovereignty, Polish energetic sovereignty. That there are still big layers of coal that can be extracted. During the last political campaign, some advocates of coal even said that we have coal enough for 200 years or so in Poland, so you can still use it, and that new mines can and that the EU climate policy is actually a political game where big countries, stronger countries try to achieve their own goals, and at the expense of weaker countries that are less modernized, have a weaker economy. This is also the argument, and it plays into the general, discourse, very polarized political discourse in Poland nowadays. And just a few days ago, there was a meeting with the miners. The government had a meeting. This was because of the St. Barbara's festivities. This is the miners' holiday. And we could hear very strong words of support for furthering this policy by the Prime Minister and by the Minister of Energy, who openly stated that the governmental plan to still develop coal industry is still valid, and what's more, new mines should be opened. New mines that where coal can be extracted easier than from those that are now very dug into deep and are maybe too dangerous or too costly. And in this respect, there was even a strong criticism towards local governments, municipalities in Silesia, that when they are accepting plans for the infrastructure in their areas, in their districts, that they allow building of houses or other buildings on areas that could be used for coal mining, and that this is a very bad move. And the minister even said, you should talk to your council members, you should put pressure on them, because they are working against our industry. So please take this in mind and do something. And this conflict, this government versus the municipal powers is also a problem. It plays into the political conflict that is in Poland. Now, why it is important in the context of the minor unions is that minor unions, though divided as they may be formally, have a tendency to support this governmental policy, because they see decarbonization as a threat to job security, and are more willing to be supportive of the policy that states that we still have enough coal to power our plants for many years. The EU aims are not applicable to the Polish situation, economic situation, and lower development, but are willing to kind of be open to dialogue. And I think that there's a few points that should be that could be worked on with the Polish miners unions that could help further this dialogue. Though, of course, this is not the effects of this are very difficult. And one of which is that just transition has to be supported, has to be worked on with actors, different actors, not only miner unions but local municipalities, local organizations, and that it requires a lot of, as it was mentioned, a lot of funding and state support, not only state, but not only state funds, but EU, but also in the European funds, because this road to even slow restructuring the Polish mining industry and employment requires a lot of steps to change changing in qualifications of workers to be more suitable for a more modern and more green friendly industry. And this is possible thanks because the Silesia region is very much has new industries, is a quite developing region, and this creates the potential, but this potential can be realized only with very much with big investments, and they require political consensus within the country, and this consensus would have to be strongly supported and by the EU, and the side that is pro coal would have to see very direct benefits for this kind of to reach this kind of consensus within the country.
Thank you, Piotr. So now I give the floor to you, to your questions and comments.
Hello, yeah, my name is Maximo. I'm an economics student at the College of Europe and activist from Madrid, Spain. And my question is regarding the financing of the just transition. So a lot has been said about how we need more state aid and funds in order to fund this transition. And I wonder if the scope needed for this state aid would be compatible with the actual the current prohibition of state aid on the treaties. So there's a number of exceptions that can be invoked to the restrictions of the internal market. And so do we need to reform the treaties in order to undertake the current the investments needed? And then regarding what was said about the cohesion funds that could be used, so what's going to be the impact of Brexit and the 7 billion that contributes the UK? Has in the Commission or in the European Parliament, has this been discussed, like for new sources of revenues? So yeah, thank you.
Hello, my name is Frida, Food and Water Europe. I'm working mainly on gas, and we're talking a lot about coal here. And I know we all know that gas is also a fossil fuel, and depending on where it comes from, it is similarly climate damaging as coal. And I was wondering, yeah, if in these just transition plans there is any room for gas, and yeah, if we have a lot of discussion about gas being such a green fuel, and I wonder if this plays in the green jobs debate as well. I hope not.
Thank you. Then over there, yes.
Hi, I'm Sanjeev Kumar from Change Partnership. Congratulations, this is a really fascinating conversation. I want to pick up two things that both Piotr and Frederick said. The first thing that Piotr, if I understand this correctly, has said is that the problem is that you have a trade union, the coal mining trade union within Poland, which is unable to have a conversation about the future. And I think I think there's a broader question for us as a community, which is how do we engineer that conversation? Because, you know, if we have one, you know, very powerful resistor, then we keep on talking to them, then we're going to get nowhere. So where's the thinking outside directly talking to the trade union in particular? Second question goes to Frederick. The case of Germany is quite fascinating, actually, because if you look at the big polluting company, RWE, we're allowed to say this in front of the cameras, I hope. They are, if you look at their workforce, a lot of the coal mining workforce are people who are short-term contracted lorry drivers. They're the ones who ferry lignite from one part to the other. The actual direct employees from RWE in Germany, in places like Grazweiler, the big lignite plants, are PhD doctors who are responsible for engineering maintenance. So they're not low-skilled workers, they're very high-skilled workers. So there's a boundary question around the just transition, which is what skills base are we really trying to support? And if you are a doctorate, do you really need to have public support to find other employment? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. 2 more questions. Jean-Claude?
Hi, it's Jean-Claude Simon from Transform. I was taking notes during the presentations, and I must say at this point I'm lost as to what kind of investments we're talking about to accomplish this. And I was wondering if any of the speakers will have an idea. The United Nations Environmental Report, I think it's from 2010, might be later than that, stated that we need to put in total investment of about 3% of European GDP per year for 10 years. So that's about between 350 and 400 billion euros per year that have to go to the transition. It's the transition as a whole, not just renewable energy. So what I'm trying to come to grasp with is that realistic? Do we share those numbers? Or are we talking about something else? And then a little comment. I've been trying to add up what the ECB released in terms of quantitative easing from 2013 to 2016. And I'm coming up with a total of 2,100 billion euros that were released to the banks during that time frame. So it would seem that that number exceeds the UN estimate for the transition by quite a substantial amount. How can we resolve that? Because it seems we're getting into, I would say it's almost an idiotic games of numbers here, and we're not sure how to come to grips with it.
Okay, thank you. One last question. Anybody or a comment? Okay, then I give the floor to our panelists. Peter, you want to start?
Ja, kann ich gerne machen.
Yes,
Also zu der Frage des Kollegen aus Spanien, da
a question from Spain, the
kenne ich mich also jetzt nicht aus.
person from ATTAC. I don't know about the rules which prohibit state aid. All I can say is that in Germany what we are demanding is that the state should come forward with a state programme to support the regions that are being hit by the coal phase out, the lignite phase out, to provide support for, well, I don't know, it could be startups, new companies, anything really, to ensure that the jobs lost are compensated for. But I can't really tell you, I'm not the right person to tell you how this plays in with the European directive. The second question was about gas, and obviously gas is a fossil fuel. But nevertheless, I feel that in terms of the damage done, gas doesn't do half as much as lignite. I can't really contribute to a debate on transition technologies, but I do feel that we'll need gas for a few years more than coal to avoid shortages or bottlenecks. Another question that has to do with gas is energy storage. Renewable energies, and there are a lot of ideas here. Well, power to gas facilities could be a means of storage so that energy can be available when there is little sun or wind. The dialogue with the unions. I mentioned how difficult it is to work with some trade unions who have specific interests to defend. It's part of the task of unions to defend their members' interests and always has been. So a mining union is logically going to tend to defend coal. Now, obviously, it's in the interest of a worker in the coal industry to think about what is going to happen after the coal phase out, and evidence shows that the coal phase out will and must happen. You can argue about the time frame, but there is a limit, and therefore the unions need to grapple with this and look at what the real interests are. Is it worth expending so much energy in a losing battle? Because the battle is lost in the long term. And in a situation like that, you need to do some serious thinking about how you can ensure that there are jobs for these people, decent, well-paid jobs. The question as to whether well-paid, high-qualified workers at RWE deserve state aid or support, I can't really answer that. But what we need to do is support companies in areas such as storing renewables. And we have a lot of people in the lignite sector that are highly qualified, and they need new jobs. Even an engineer needs a new job, and those jobs are going to have to be created in the regions concerned, so there will be a need for startups to be supported. And then the figures. I too have lost track of the sources of funding that are available. What I was trying to say in my presentation is that we tend to get a little bit obsessed by these different sources of funding. They're not the solution. If I spend all of my time looking at different funds, that's not going to solve the problem. How money can be transferred from one to the other, no, that's not where the solution lies. What we need are new and innovative ideas. Thank you.
Perhaps first the question on natural gas. It's true that it's not part of our initiative at the moment, simply because we see by the market forces coal being pushed out of the energy mix much quicker than natural gas. So in terms of priorities on which communities to assist first, it just comes naturally that the communities employed with coal mining sort of would be affected first, and that's why we're focusing on this first. On the total price tag of the transition, I don't think that we in the Commission have done any calculations on that right now. Of course, we have calculations on how much it would cost to transition to a new energy system, but that doesn't cover investments in the regions that are potentially not going to benefit from the jobs, which are going to be unevenly distributed. So with the platform, we are trying to look into this problem of uneven redistribution of jobs and see whether perhaps also the coal mining regions would have an important renewables potential. If you look, for example, at the region Marica Basin in Bulgaria, Bulgaria is a very good spot for investment in renewables. That basin could potentially fuel, I saw calculations, half of Bulgaria's energy needs if the coal mine over there was replaced by renewables. So we just have to look at look at also the mapping of coal regions and mapping of the renewable potential and try to address the problem of uneven redistribution of jobs and see whether in the context where the resources are becoming more and more restrained, the question of Brexit, of course we have to be just much more, smart, creative about how we are using our resources, because it is true that we have a lot of question marks over the next budget that are still unresolved. I know there are organizations outside of the Commission which are trying to reflect on this question, how this process could be financed within the EU budget, and this is not the thinking of the Commission, but for example the Bruegel Institute, I know they are reflecting on exactly this question, how to finance transition under the new MFF. So this debate is really, I think, starting right now, and is definitely going to accelerate as we get closer to May 2018 and March, when the announcements should be made and the consultations should start soon. So I think that was really it in terms of questions. Thanks.
Ja, vielleicht am Anfang auch zur Frage der Finanzierung.
Perhaps I could start with financing. I can only agree. A big discussion is going on about what is going to happen in the EU in the medium term. The basic problem is that there is not enough money. Brexit will leave a gap. It hasn't yet been quantified. And then there are new areas for expenditure, defence. They want more money. In the end, yes, the structural funds probably will end up with less, and that's a problem. I talked about the DGB's Marshall Plan. I said that we wanted to fund it by taxing assets at a higher rate in EU countries. We wanted a 3% levy for private assets over €1 million. That doesn't mean that grandmothers have to sell their houses. We're talking about people with considerable assets, and to provide a future for all, we need to make sure that those people contribute at a fair rate. That is absolutely essential. And the problem isn't limited to coal mining areas. We keep talking about coal, but we need to look beyond that. If we take our climate objectives seriously, every sector of industry has to reorganise in order at least to become greenhouse gas neutral. We're talking about transport, about energy-intensive industries. Obviously, we're going to continue to want steel and other basic materials, but we need to limit the amount of CO2 that we're releasing into the atmosphere. So the challenges are actually much larger. At the moment, we're focusing on the coal mining regions, but there are other regions that are relatively prosperous at the moment that still have structural change ahead. I'm thinking about the car industry, moving to electric vehicles. Ingolstadt, where the AfD is already the second biggest party, because of the uncertainty about what the future holds, things could get worse. And that's why it's important that we should start talking about these matters today, so that the Pied Piper of Hamlet doesn't come along with tempting ideas. gas. We're talking about 100% renewable energies, but to get there, well, it's a stony path. It's going to take a while, let's be honest about it. We'll need fossil fuels for a few decades yet. We have to reduce them as much as we can in keeping with the Paris climate objectives. We need to reduce them far faster than we might be able to imagine at the moment. And then jobs and levels of qualification or skills. In coal industry companies in Germany, I mean, you were talking about fixed-term contracts and agency workers. I haven't seen that. We see that mainly in new sectors, sometimes including renewables, and IG Metall is trying to push forward with collective agreements and collective bargaining in those companies. When it comes to surface mining, coal mining, we don't have that type of thing. Structures vary a great deal. But the question isn't really whether, at the end of the day, an engineer deserves state aid. That would have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. But we don't want to allow anybody to slip through the net. However, the question is even bigger than that. Can we develop new ideas to give prospects to these regions? Look at Lusatia, for example. Some of you might know Lusatia. It's not as dynamic in industrial terms as the Rhine coal field. There we have demographic developments. 90% of jobs in coal have been lost in Lusatia. There was a collapse after reunification in terms of industry, and that is why people feel so motivated to hang on to any area that can provide good jobs. The shipping industry has gone, the solar industry. So we need to talk about the sustainability, the durability of industrial and energy policies to ensure that there really are long-term prospects for people. An exodus is not a solution, which doesn't mean that we have to hang on tooth and nail at all costs to everything. Something to think about. And dialogue, yes, well, sometimes it's relatively easy, sometimes it's very difficult, but we have to go out there, get in touch with people, talk, argue, and find a common solution. There are enough people who are ready to quarrel. The big challenge is finding common solutions, and that's what I would support. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe to start with the question about the dialogue. I have here a booklet from 2013 that includes a resolution that was taken by the Polish trade union, miners' trade union regarding climate policy, and it has 5 points that I think everybody could find reasonable. That restructurization should be of the economy of the coal and lignite economy should include special courses or for miners who want to change their jobs. That the changes should not in any way create the additional cost for energy and heating to the people. That this is important. That there needs to be an international European solidarity. That means that those who have less developed economies should be treated more leniently. That what we talked about, that there has to be a global perspective, so that we do not change our economy, but trade or make energy or resources deals with countries that do not respect our climate goals or don't respect labor regulations and so on, and that there needs to be a dialogue and social acceptation for this transition. So it's obvious everything is quite okay. I wouldn't say that they're not able to talk, because they're very open. In many cases, a lot of the heads of the miner union we cooperate with are members of the European Economic Social Committee, so they are open to dialogue. I would say that they're much afraid of the consequences of this dialogue, and how much the aims and the aims that all sides agree on will be actually realized. And this is, I think, mostly due to the lack of kind of confidence in that reconstruction brings good effects to the miners, to the workers, and the local communities. Experience with the restructuralization of Polish mining in the past 20 years, over 20 years, is not positive. A lot of mines were closed. The idea of the miners often didn't receive and didn't enter any program to change their qualification. They received some even substantial funds, just money, so that they are not left alone. And but without any economic perspectives within the region or the local communities, soon this money just ended, and they were in a very bad, precarious situation. And this is why I think is the reason why, first of all, we need that Poland itself needs a political consensus, which is hard on itself, on the long-term plan of economic energy transition. And that it needs to have has to be solely strongly grounded within the EU policy that will make that will make the goals of such a strategy more feasible in their eyes. This is what I personally think. And about the investments, what kind of investments, I don't want to talk about particularly numbers of money of funds, because I'm not an expert on this. What I think that has already been shown during various studies in regards to Poland, and especially the Silesia region I talked about, there are obvious industries where we can see that well-qualified miners, when they finished working in the mines or in the industry, go to. We can see that there are segments of the economy that need qualified workers, and where miners go. For example, car industry, industrial processing, transport. These are the research show that these are branches where obviously naturally these miners, especially those who have younger ones, those who have higher education, can go to. And this is like an area where. So this is an area which obviously could be a place of bigger investments for new jobs, and of course considering that there are green jobs. But of course this is also a challenge for the state, because these are industries that are mostly private. This is a free market, so this also is connected with the revising of the role of the state in economic transformation. And of course, about the role of gas, from what I see, the gas is not in the Polish discussion about the energy mix. It doesn't play such a significant role that it will be important part of this mix. Obviously, there's no idea of limiting it strongly with the next years. Though there was a perspective for some time, and there was a lot of enthusiasm which connected with shale gas. And there was a concept that there is a lot of shale gas in Poland, and that this will be a new highly developing industry that will develop in a similar way that it did in the United States, and it will be a very good, it will bring good economic effects and will secure Polish energy sovereignty. But this was in 2012, I think, and up till now this has not proven so.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. I have good news. We have a lunch break now. It will be served around the corner, and we meet again at 2.